Nneka Orji is a true powerhouse, much like a modern-day superhero leading a double life. By day, she's a consultant helping executives and boards tackle complex business challenges. But beyond the corporate world, Nneka is passionately dedicated to driving social impact, serving as a trustee at UK Youth and as a non-executive director at Business LEN. In this episode, Nneka shares her journey from engineering to consulting and how she's navigated male-dominated industries with resilience and purpose. She opens up about the importance of finding her voice, confronting her fear of public speaking, and embracing diversity in leadership in ways you might not expect. And as someone who's constantly juggling multiple roles, she's got plenty of advice on how to create balance without losing sight of what truly matters.
I had this moment where I looked back on the year and I thought, okay, if someone took my job away, what else would I have to show for my contributions to society? Obviously, was quite a big and black and white question. There were other things I was doing, but in terms of real impact, I had a moment where I said, actually, I don't want to be, I say one-dimensional, and I'm not saying if people focus on their jobs, it's one dimension. But for me, I felt there were many facets in life that I hadn't yet really explored.
Nneka, hello, and very nice to have you on the show this morning. How are you today?
Good morning. Yeah, I'm very well. We were just saying the sun is out. It feels like summer's finally here, which is great. So yeah, feeling quite bouncy and happy.
Excellent. Well, look, I will have done a little intro for my guests at the beginning, so they'll know who they're meeting today. But I think it's still helpful maybe to hear it from you and to tell us a bit more about what your current role is and perhaps how you got into that.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm really happy to share my story, which I hope will be useful for some of the listeners. Yeah, my current role, I'm the senior director at Alvarez Marsal. It's a professional services firm. Effectively, we do consulting, strategic consulting, restructuring, and due diligence work. We also do lots of other things like tax services. But I sit within our performance improvement team, and I focus on wealth and investment management businesses. So essentially, working with boards and executives of these sometimes large businesses, sometimes smaller businesses, on some of their most strategic priorities. So anything from maybe an acquisition where we're doing a diligence to regulatory concerns to cost optimization and transformation. So that's what I do now. I've been in this role for 2 years. Prior to this, I spent 3+ years as COO at a wealth management firm. And prior to that, almost 10 years in consulting. So I've spent pretty much 14 years around the city and primarily in financial services. I should say I always, that's my day job. But I think that the other thing that's important to highlight is also the other parts of me. I'm a trustee of a charity, UK Youth. And the charity's mission is essentially to support young people and the youth sector. And then the other formal role I have is as a non-exec at Business London, which is a business lobbying group effectively representing the needs, demands of businesses in London. So those are my formal roles in being a mentor and so on. But yes, of course.
Yeah. Well, it's. I always like when people mention, and that's why I like people to do their own introduction, because it's really interesting what comes out and what are the things that you think we need to know about you and how much you care about these additional roles that you have, and we'll get to that in a second. But there's one thing that you mentioned about your current role, and obviously we all know the lifestyle of a consultant. You go there, usually present presentation slides, maybe not these days, but we've all seen that movie with George Clooney. And you go into these firms and maybe it's less glamorous than that in reality. But
definitely less glamorous.
Yeah, and you don't get to see George Clooney every day.
No.
But you do go there and you have to present in front of these boards. And I'm sure there's something to be said about who you're usually presenting against, what the diversity of these boards usually looks like. And I think the other point is, and I was just chatting about that with a friend who works in a similar role yesterday. How often do they actually take your recommendations? Because I think that's one of the challenges with that role, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think, the one thing you sort of know as a consultant is two things probably. Most people think the main skill set you have in life is essentially creating PowerPoints and not much else, which is Also not true. But then the second thing is, you know that you are most likely walking into, whether it's a new client, new organization, with a sense of slight apprehension, because essentially most clients don't really want you to be there. There's a resistance to change, not you as an individual and personally, but there's general resistance to change. When I first joined, I studied engineering and thought, okay, what's the best sort of career for me? I knew pretty early on I didn't want to be an engineer, but the thing I did gain from engineering was this problem solving mindset. And the next most attractive career for me at the time was consulting. The thing I loved most is my very first project was actually a very demanding client. But what I loved is that we were able to work through the problems with the clients. And then I feel like you build a really strong, credible relationship. And that's really ultimately building that trust is what gets you to deliver results. And clients, I'm friends with some of my clients now. So it's not them and us. I think that's the main thing. It's actually coming in, sitting side by side. And initially, I didn't think I really had a voice. I think I struggled a bit to say, oh, all these really senior people don't really, they know a lot more than me. That was my working assumption. And in some instances, they do. And actually, of course, as external consultants, you come in, you won't know the business as anywhere near as much as those who live and breathe in that business every day. But there's always something that you can bring. And I think over the years, I started learning, okay, I do have something to say. I have experiences that aren't necessarily within this business, but are relevant to the challenges that the business is facing currently. It's been a journey, but I think it's definitely a much clearer, authentic voice now than it was previously.
Yeah, and how do you get to actually develop that voice? And I think you did mention some of the support system that you have around you with family, with friends, with sponsors. But I think for some of the listeners out there, it might not be so obvious or straightforward. How do you actually go about finding that support system if it wasn't already there for you?
Yeah, I think, well, family was always there for me. And I think friends as well to a degree, but obviously friendships change over the years. But for me, the main thing was, I think the first thing was working with leaders who I respected and just seeing how they engaged, how they both communicated, but also gave people the space to communicate. And I think when you're in those environments and you see it being sort of role modeled, then it's inevitable that you pick up some of those skills. So that's the first thing. I think it's always important that the content of the work that you do is critical and it needs to align to your interests and so on. But actually, if you do have the opportunity to identify someone in the business you're working with, just having some level of proximity to them, observing them, I think is a great, well, it's helped me at least. So that's one thing. I think the second thing I would say is also just finding opportunities to practice your voice. I was someone who really hated public speaking. Now, I think it's the second most feared thing after death. I've heard that
Yes,
somewhere.
I did hear that somewhere. And I thought, honestly, how is that possible? People would rather be dead than
Yeah,
how is that, how sad
yeah,
is that?
yeah, no, exactly. So I think it's one of those things that I really struggled with, and I couldn't exactly tell where the fear was coming from. It was completely irrational. But I decided quite early on, there's no way I can progress if I'm not able to communicate in a way that's aligned with my values and speaks and carries my true voice. So I started finding opportunities, whether it was team meetings, literally forcing myself to present, finding also external opportunities, going to schools, speaking. And some of those presentations were, I think, bumpy is one way to describe them. But they gave me the opportunity to say, actually, what do I feel comfortable with? What do I need to refine? And still to this day, I'm having to push myself to do that. So I go to Toastmasters. And it's always because I'm trying to find different ways to communicate with different audiences. All the techniques, but also, again, what needs to remain constant is that I'm true to myself and the message I carry is one that I feel comfortable doing. So that's the second thing. And the third thing, which sounds slightly different, was actually writing. I was writing partly because I have lots of opinions. And so I just thought I would write. There were a couple of women's magazines that I was writing for. And I had opportunities to do that when I was chief of staff to the chair at the firm. I had to write a lot of speeches. And actually, when you're able to put things down on paper, it helps formulate your thinking, and therefore, at least for me, gives me confidence to then vocalize my thoughts.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on something there, and I was nodding enthusiastically as you were speaking, because I think it resonates with many women, and not just women, but I think it's all about what you said, finding a voice and building that internal confidence. And as you said, it all comes down to actually doing the inner work, and sometimes that's not just what you do in the office or
Yeah.
formally in your work. There's a lot of other things that you have to get through to build that, and it's a process, and it's part of life. And I think
Yeah.
it's just that that's part of the reason why I started this podcast as well, because I wanted to give examples that, nobody was born with it, relatable examples of women that you would come across every day in the city, and just hear from them that they had to work. There were challenges, there were fears, and there still are, even when you.
That's the main thing. It's a journey. It's
Yeah.
always the case. You're always working towards something, and trying to improve and evolve.
What are you working towards now? What's your, yeah, it's always, there's probably more than one thing, but is there something that's a theme that you're currently working with?
Yes. I think the primary theme is really trying to make sure that I use the term balance, but it's not about sort of work-life balance. It's actually getting the balance right for me. I'm someone who I thrive on just the variety of stuff I do. And for some people, actually, it sounds like a nightmare, but for me, I love it. I can go to work. I can get energy from a different forum. We were just talking, I'm recording this from Albright, and I joined the membership because I just felt I wanted a different space, different environment, and just different connections, seeing, entrepreneurs here compared to a very corporate settings. So I'm someone who thrives off that. However, that comes with some challenges, because every minute of my day basically is pretty much accounted for, and it doesn't give much space to just sit still and do nothing, just having me time and pausing. That's sort of the primary goal at the moment. And I actually restarted coaching, and that's one of the things that we're working through to say, okay, one, sort of the drivers of me doing so much, but also the importance of having to do the sort of self-care side of things as well. So I think that's my primary goal, amongst other things, of course, but that's the one I think I find most challenging.
Yeah, and again, I think that many of us can relate, and there's lots of, I think in my conversations on this podcast, that does come up a lot. And I don't know, maybe it's the same for men, but especially for women, I think there's this kind of constant pressure to feel, and we talked about that when we met before, that to fill in the schedule, to be seen as doing things, and sometimes you don't even pause and think, why am I doing these? So I actually also work with a coach, and I think many of us who want to work on that kind of inner balance probably should consider that, because I think I've invited quite a few coaches on the show, and it takes a while to find the right match for you. It's a bit like a hairdresser. It's not always an instant fit, but once you find that person, it's just so helpful to get that mirror, if you will.
Exactly.
Of who
it's
you are.
The mirror up. Yeah. And actually, the coach I'm using now, she coached me about 3 years ago, probably. And it was actually slightly different sort of priority areas and focus areas that we were looking at. And I think that's one of the things that I'm learning, is that actually the tools that I used at one point previously are not the tools that I need now. So I've obviously hopefully addressed some of the focus areas that we worked on previously. But now it's really around, okay, how do I make this much more sustainable?
Yeah, and I think the reality is, and one of the biggest realizations for me was that actually when you've given yourself the space and the chance to recover, you're actually a lot more effective in the things that you do, whether it's at work, whether it's in business meetings, in the volunteering that we'll get to in a second. I just think that, I my biggest mistake probably from when I was younger was just thinking that doing more, prepping more, cramming more, reading more is the best way to do it. And there was recently a time when I was preparing for a meeting, and I was like, you know what, I'm exhausted. I'm just going to go and sleep. Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be much better if I do that than just cramming and prepping and doing or whatever, or just going through the presentation again and again and again.
Yeah.
And, I think people can just feel your energy when you walk into the room. And if you've looked after yourself, and if you've given yourself that me time that you refer to, I think the outcome of your work is actually going to be much better than if you're just constantly pushing and pushing.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's the thing, it's seeing that value. In the moment, you think no, because you can see an output in doing something. And that's the conversations I'm having with my coach is, okay, there is value in that output, but there's also much more value in the stillness and nothing in that moment, but for more impact later. So
yeah, the instant gratification of taking something off the list. And at some point, I just threw away the list. And that was the best thing I ever did. I still have a list, but it's a much more reasonable list, I'd say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I do want to get to your volunteering and the roles that you have outside of your full-time job, because I've always been saying, and this is why I really wanted you to join us on the show, is that you can do more than one thing. So you don't have to choose. You can do it at the same time, obviously meaningfully and with impact. But you do have 2 other roles that you mentioned in the beginning. So how did that come up and into your life as another theme, and why do you do it?
Yeah, I think the best way probably to approach this is looking back after my first year of work. So I had this moment where I looked back on the year and I thought, okay, if someone took my job away, what else would I have to show for my contributions to society? Obviously, was quite a big and black and white question. There were other things I was doing, but in terms of real impact, and I had a moment where I said, actually, I don't want to be, I say one dimensional, and I'm not saying if people focus on their jobs, it's one dimension. But for me, I felt there were many facets in life that I hadn't yet really explored. And I was having conversations with someone said school governors are a great role to get involved in. And I thought that's not for me, don't have experience and so on. But after, I think a year later or so, or maybe 2 years later, I did sign up to be a school governor. And yes, so I started in this role. And the first couple of meetings, I realized as a school governor that actually there was more that I could bring that I thought I would not either be relevant or I was too young, too inexperienced. And that's one of the things that I always try and encourage people to do. And hopefully some of your listeners as well, is there's so many skills that we have and we potentially take for granted because everyone else in corporate jobs or in the sector we work in all have those skills. But actually, when we step out of our little bubbles, because they are bubbles, and we look in another sector, another field, there's so much that we can add. And for me, also importantly, so much I could learn. So having done that role as a school governor for probably 6 years, I decided to pause and just give myself some time back. But then soon after, another role came up for Business London to be on the board. And it was just an opportunity I couldn't turn down because I looked at the board and just amazing, very experienced leaders, basically. And I thought this would be a great opportunity, back to one of my points earlier, actually having proximity to experienced leaders. So it was an opportunity I can say no to. And also the I guess, priorities for Business London to make London one of the best cities in the world to do business. And that comes in multiple areas. But one of the key areas is around people, so skills, employability. So there's a theme. It's always, for me, it's around sort of partly young people. How do we make sure that as a society that we're reaching our potential effectively? And then again, 2 years ago, another opportunity came up. I joined the board of trustees at UK Youth. A really compelling mission to see young people, and there's just so many disadvantages that they have. So actually being able to play a role, and it's a tiny role that I play as a trustee, is really important. And again, these things inspire me. It gives a lot of perspective and reminds me not just how lucky I am, but also that there are amazing people doing amazing things every day.
It keeps you grounded, certainly. And I love that you mentioned also about pausing with one role and then moving on and giving yourself time and space, because yes, as you said, you can't be doing all things at all times, and it's okay. And I really want, when we have these conversations, to normalize pausing and being okay, but then at the same time going for what feels fulfilling and intuitive. And I think there was a bit of a theme in all these roles that you've had, that you always wanted to be the bridge to employability work. There's always something about giving back to the community and giving these opportunities, maybe because you felt that you've had those, but not everybody else would get them. I wonder if that was part of what the thinking was and the learning that you're doing now.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's it. I think that my parents always used to say, to whom much is given, much is expected, which has been like a massive driving force for me, because I just feel that there's goes back to the point that I made earlier. You might think in your bubble that, there are all these negative things and if only you had X, Y, and Z. But actually, I've had like some of the best education. I've had just a super supportive family. All of these things I would have taken for granted. But actually, I'm really lucky that I've had all of those things. And all of that has come through hard work from my parents, all the people who supported and so on. So I feel that it's only right to pay it forward. And I just feel it's a responsibility. And I feel like if we all did our bits, I'm sure that we would feel like we were in a better place.
Yeah, and there's an element of actually taking ownership and accountability for things rather than just complaining or saying this doesn't work and that doesn't work. Actually, okay, can I be doing something to change that rather than just be sitting there and what people do these days, write comments and complain. Great, you're a fantastic activist. You've just written a comment. Wonderful. Let me congratulate you. Yeah,
it's that bystander piece, and I don't know whether it's because me and my twin are the oldest of 6 children. I don't know what it is, but there's an element of I want to take ownership, and if I maybe it comes from a place of slight impatience as well. Like if no one's doing it, well, fine, I will try and do my bit. And sometimes I'm not sure I'm the right person to be doing something, but it's trying to actually get people together. And again, this is where the consulting element comes in as well, and the engineering, there's a problem. I know that there will be a solution. We just need to get the right people in the room to solve it. So it's that same mindset, I guess, that runs through most of what I do.
Yeah, and when you said these opportunities came up, I thought if someone's listening, how did they come up? Because I feel like not everyone always feels maybe that these opportunities are presenting themselves to them. So was it something that you did perhaps that led to these opportunities coming up?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is definitely when it comes to building sort of a non-exec role, because essentially I would love a portfolio career because I just think that you learn so much from different experiences and also when it comes to flexibility and so on. So I love my day job in terms of the intellectual stimulation and the impact I can have. But the variety of what I do alongside that is really important. So one of the things that I was involved in when the firm I worked in a few years ago was setting up a board readiness program. And a lot of the time, candidates or people looking for board roles would say, well, nothing's coming to me. I've updated my CV. But sometimes starting with I say simple, but actually an important role like a school governor or the trustee of a charity. And school governors, they are absolutely begging to have more governors in schools. So there's no excuse because it gives you that experience of what it's like to have that oversight role and true governance. And that I think is always is a stepping stone. It demonstrates that you actually know what that non-exec type of role looks like. So that's the first thing I would say. I think the second thing is, of course, joining the right networks. For me, I guess I was sort of lucky in that someone I had previously worked with indirectly mentioned that there might be a role. And then I went through a formal interview. But actually, the more you do it and actually talking about it helps. And, I've been posting a lot more on LinkedIn over the past 18 months, but actually that's led to more inbound queries around their non-exec roles for startups. And so when people see that's what you do or what you're looking to do, I think that also helps.
Yeah, but you do have to take some action. You can't just sit there and wait for people to find you.
No.
If you do that, maybe you'll be waiting a very long time.
Yes, exactly.
And I agree. I think it's so important to share with people, even if it's just an idea or something that you have at the back of your mind that's not quite crystallized yet. Just what you're thinking, where you're hoping to get to it. I literally have a friend who was having a chat with their mentor a few months ago and mentioned, oh, maybe I'd like to at some point work in Spain. And then that mentor connected her with someone. And guess what? She now got a job in Madrid and she's moved on. So,
exactly.
If you don't mention it and you're just too shy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's it. A lot of people say, put it out to the universe and see what happens. I think it's about vocalizing what it is you want. I think about other opportunities I've had where I've said to someone, whether it's a partner or a sponsor, and I've said, yes, I'm enjoying this for now, but in the next year or so, I know I might be a bit bored. I want a different opportunity. And actually, it might not line up exactly well in terms of timings. But when those opportunities have come up, those individuals have said, oh, yeah, I remember you said this Are you still interested? I think that there's something it's not, again, a full commitment until you're ready, but I think it's always important to say, okay, what is this that you're trying to achieve? Not just in the next year, 2 years, but actually 10 years down the line. What are your interests? And plugging yourself into networks. I think that's the thing that I've tried to do partly by default with my the sort of business development side of my work, but also through all the other things I'm doing. And you'll be amazed to see just how many opportunities are out there. And it's not always odd when you actually do get into some positions and the individuals have said, oh, it was taking us ages to find people. And at the same time, lots of people are looking. So there seems to be always a bit of a disconnect between some skills and experiences and then the actual opportunities that are available. So definitely tell someone or tell people about what you're looking for.
Yes, I call it the planting the seed technique.
Yes.
And just even if you don't know exactly what it is, you don't have to always go to people with a direct proposition, oh, I want to do this X, Y, and Z. But it's more like, this is what I'm thinking. You know, what are your thoughts? You don't even have to be asking for anything specific. Just getting people's thoughts, I suppose, is the best way. And I must say, like you, I was at some point thinking about a portfolio career, and then actually speaking with women, some of whom I'm hoping to get on the show as well. It's not for everyone, and I think you do have to go into it fully knowing what that means. And I think maybe for someone coming from consulting, that could be quite relevant because you are in a way already working for someone else. But if you've always worked in-house, going to that could be quite a shock. So again, if you don't speak to people, you could easily end up with maybe something that doesn't feel quite right. But I do want to go back to LinkedIn as well, because you mentioned you've been quite active, and that's been one of the ways in which you've created some of those opportunities. So going back to your comment about people being afraid of not just speaking publicly, but just having a voice, whether it's on social media, posting, putting themselves out there. And I've certainly had this with this project, and now I'm thinking of getting more active in other social media away from LinkedIn. And, you have to have a very thick skin, I suppose, to do something like that.
Yeah. And I'm a very private person. I can be open and obviously honest and have engaging discussions, but I am someone who values privacy. But at the same time, I guess my day job means that I need to develop business and I need to sell work and I need to make sure people know what I do. But that's not unique to consulting. I think in every role, to a degree, whether you're selling yourself, your service, your product, whatever it is, there's an element of sales to what we all do. And so we were encouraged to sort of start posting, and the thought literally terrified me. I can't even explain. My first post probably took me an hour, and it was maybe 2 lines. I can't remember. It was just there's something about, I guess, being quite vulnerable to a certain degree in terms of what will people say, blah blah blah. So I think for me, the key thing was trying to develop an authentic voice, to have very clear messages. So I said, okay, I'll focus on broadly 3 things: wealth management as a sector. Secondly, the sort of work I do and some of the topics that come up. And then thirdly, the things that I really care about: diversity, social mobility, philanthropy. And so I said, actually, if I'm talking about those 3 things, it's not that scary because it's what I do. It's what I'm actually interested in. And then I started trying to also make sure that it didn't feel too, I guess, bland, because I want people to engage and hopefully take something away. And I think it's come with time, but at the same, there's sometimes I post and, the algorithm can be very brutal. And do you think, I've put work into this post and there's limited engagement? And then there are other posts that, just you don't put much time into and then people engage. But I think what's kept me going, initially I was like, should I keep going? But then actually the feedback I get, because I think they say only 3% of LinkedIn users actually comment, engage, like. There are 97% of people on there looking, observing, scrolling, but not engaging. And the number of people who sort of fall in that 97%, obviously within my network, my 97%, who won't comment or like on the post, but will send me a direct message and say, oh, I saw on this post you talked about coaching. Can you refer me to your coach, for example? Or how did you get involved in mentoring? And actually, could you be a mentor? So I think it's the feedback I've gotten from that. The likes and comments, that they're great too. But actually, this is actually helping people without sounding too arrogant about it. But it's actually useful to some people.
Yeah, and I think it's even helpful for me to hear it, because I think in the beginning when I was starting with this, it was all about likes and comments. And And you're right. Most people don't do that, either because they don't want to be judged, or they're like you, worried about what they're going to put out there. And it takes them 3 hours to put something publicly. But when it's private, you're a lot more. And that's sort of how we connected. I think you commented on one of my episodes.
Yes, exactly.
We had met through volunteering. So just to put this into perspective and that example of networking. And then it turns out we knew somebody who was a guest on the show and had in common, and then I messaged you privately, I'm pretty sure, or maybe I didn't, maybe I commented. I think I've gone past that stage, but yes, I think we all know how that works. And I think this is really going back to that point about building your personal brand and what you want to stand for, because I know you talk a lot about diversity as well, and that's quite close to your heart, in addition to the opportunities for employment that I know you focus on as well. And you often talk about your community. So what does that mean to you, and why does that matter?
I'm always slightly impressed, but also concerned when I see people who say, "Oh, it's fine, I can do it myself," because I just don't think anyone can survive in any industry, in any walk of life by themselves. I think that you need a tribe, you need your community, you need the people who you can go into a room and be very honest with, but they'll also expect the honesty back, to tell you actually, well, you need to do this slightly differently, or, be your cheerleaders and say you're amazing. And, we all go through ups and downs. So I feel that the idea of not finding a community, again, respect to those who choose to do that, but I just couldn't do it, because I think from a sort of emotional, mental, everything space, I think that you need a support network. So for me, I feel that given the nature of the work I do work in a predominantly male environment, and that's not ideal. We want to get more women into the sector, whether it's consulting, whether it's wealth and investments, whether it's deals, all of those areas that I work in. So I guess for me, I also like to get the balance of going into sometimes all female or just more diverse spaces. I think it's very good for me to see how things are approached differently, and also just to feel a sense of belonging as well. But also, I think when it comes to sort of underprivileged communities, I just feel that there's a disservice that's being done. And I feel quite strongly about it. I don't think maybe I did before when I was younger, but I didn't really think too much about it. But definitely now I feel that there's something around the inequality that we see in society that just doesn't really sit well with me, especially, if we all had similar opportunities at the beginning, then it's different and people work their way through it. But the fact that we start off with different levels of opportunities and different access, and then somehow everyone's working to try and get themselves to a level playing field. It's counterintuitive, it doesn't make sense, and it's unjust. So that's really, I guess, what motivates me to try and do what I can, the little that I can, to like I say, whether it's mentoring, whether it's speaking at different events, to, I say, role model, but just to be visible in that sense that you can actually have a similar career. Nothing should stop you from ever seeing that as an aspiration that you can achieve. But I think that's part of why I try and to be a bit more visible on LinkedIn and other platforms as well.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to ask about, the power of representation, and the fact that quite often we always say, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And I wonder if that's part of your motivation as well. And if you've had such feedback or experiences that made you realize that it's actually important to be out there and to be seen, not just for your own sake, but actually for those coming after you.
Yeah, definitely. And it was interesting. I went to an event, I was on a panel a couple of days ago, and someone said, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And someone said, well, I disagree with that. I think that if you can't see it, you can still be it. It's going to be harder, but if you're the first in any industry, you won't see that. And so I think that there's a balance of, it's important to have representation. It's important to have role models. But at the same time, if you're somewhere in a field, in a sector, and you can't see exactly you in that sense, then you try not to be put off by that, but be very proactive and intentional in terms of the support you'll need to still sort of forge that path. I guess for me, yes, there aren't many senior Black women within the specific area that I sit in, but I know there was a managing partner of a large consulting firm who was a Black woman, and very distant in terms of my proximity, but actually still very someone that I can engage with and say, okay, I can see that that's possible within that firm or within elsewhere. So I see that it's possible. but it comes with challenges. And if you don't have, this goes back to the support network, if you don't have that, you will feel like an outsider fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you challenged that view a little bit. And I think for me, also, I haven't thought about that, but I think you're right. If you don't always have to look for someone that's exactly having the same ethnicity, background, skin color, whatever it may be. Think a bit more broadly. And maybe they don't have the exact same role. Maybe they're not in the firm. Maybe they're somewhere else. But there are people who are out there and are willing to help.
Yeah, definitely. And I always say, like, I look back, my sponsors have been mostly white men. And actually, that's not a bad thing. I think that sometimes if you're looking for just a carbon copy of you, it will be hard, because you need to find a very specific, especially if you're in a sort of minority group, you'll need to hop around quite a lot to find that carbon copy. And you probably won't, because that person physically might look similar to you, but actually life experiences are completely different. So I think, yes, we want to see more representation, more diverse representation, but for what we have now, we need to make sure that we are building the relationships that will support us on the sort of journeys that we're on, regardless.
Yeah, so maybe focus a bit more, not just on the external characteristics, but a bit more on the experiences, and whether you want to bring diversity or find someone who's had similar experience, then focus on those rather than just necessarily who came from where and what they look like and what their job description might be.
Exactly. So it comes back again. I will always say this: find good leaders, regardless of where they're from, what they look like. Good leadership, strong values. I think that's the key thing.
Yeah, well, we've gone back full circle to where we started, but I think that's a very nice way to end this episode. Nneka, thank you so much for taking the time and certainly giving inspiration and hopefully fantastic ideas to our listeners out there.
No, thank you. And thanks for hosting this. This is obviously you doing this out of passion, but also in your free time. So I've listened to quite a few of the episodes, and it's really great to see just how many women are doing so many amazing things in different walks of life. So yeah, thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. And yes, I do passionately believe that it's important to share these stories. So stay tuned and you'll get some more next week. So I hope that you enjoyed this first episode of my mini-series, Diversity in the Boardroom and How to Find Your Voice. I honestly think that this is such an important message because, as I've said many, many times, I think it's hard enough finding your own voice, but then it's even harder hearing it. So it's not even about expressing it sometimes. It's about tuning out all the noise and other people's opinions and voices and telling you how things should be done and how you're going to succeed. And sometimes well-meaning, of course, but I think there's also so many people that try to sell you magic solutions and fast tracks to things. And it all starts with listening within. But you can tell that the whole idea of taking pauses was one that really, really resonated with me and Nneka. And we've talked about it a lot on the show. But I always keep coming back to this, mostly because I need this as a reminder more than anyone else that all good leaders do pause and they do it very well. And the best ones are the ones who do it most often. So here's your little daily reminder from me and Nneka to make sure that you pause more often to achieve even better performance at whatever it is that you're doing. The other point about that conversation that I absolutely love was about contributing to society. Or in other words, what is your mission? And again, if you follow me on socials, you'll hear me talk about that all the time. And the reality is that, yes, I do that because I really care and because it's a topic that's very close to my heart. What is your gift that you have that you are not using at the moment in your day job? And I always go back to somebody who's inspired me a lot over the years. One of the things that she says is there's a risk in doing something and then there's a risk in not doing anything at all. So I'll let that one sit because I think it's a theme that's been coming a lot for me this month. And then finally, I really like Nneka's engineering mindset, the fact that she sees herself as a problem solver. But the reality is that oftentimes what we tend to forget that it's not just about us coming up with the most brilliant solution, but actually the best solution is to admit that you might not be the best person to solve a problem. And it's all about getting the right people in the room. Next time on the show, we continue with our Women in the Boardroom series with executive search expert Gail Bishop, who answers all the questions you've ever wanted to ask about why getting a non-executive board role as a woman is so much harder and what companies can do to improve diversity. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Sound of Breaking Glass. I truly appreciate you being here with me. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss on any new episodes. They drop every 2 weeks. I'd also love for you to join me over on Instagram on LinkedIn, where I share more behind-the-scenes moments, guest insights, and extra resources just for our amazing Breakers community. Let's keep the conversation going, and I can't wait to connect with you there. Until next time, take care and keep breaking through.